Freddie Mercury sat at a piano writing lyrics so poisonous that when his bandmates first read them, they went silent. Not because the words were bad, because they'd never seen hatred this pure, this focused, this absolutely unforgiving committed to paper. "Are you sure about this?" Brian May finally asked. Freddie's answer was simple. Every single word. The song would be called Death on Two Legs, and it would open Queen's most successful album with what rock journalists would later call the most vicious character assassination ever set to music. But here's where it gets truly incredible. The man Freddie was destroying in that song would be so enraged that he'd file a lawsuit. And by filing that lawsuit, he'd do something Freddie never could have done legally. He'd publicly identify himself as the target. He'd stand up in court and essentially announce, "Yes, I'm the blood-sucking leech Freddie Mercury is singing about, and I'm suing to prove it." This is the story of how Queen escaped a contract that was slowly suffocating them. How Freddie Mercury turned years of exploitation into 3 minutes and 43 seconds of musical revenge. And how the target of that revenge couldn't help but prove every accusation true. But to understand why those lyrics were so venomous, you need to understand what had been done to 4 musicians who were achieving global success while barely able to afford heat in their apartments. In the early 1970s, Queen was ambitious, talented, and completely unknown. Their sound didn't fit any existing category. Complex harmonies, layered structures, operatic ambitions meeting rock aggression. Creating that sound required serious studio time, and studio time cost serious money they didn't have. Trident Studios seemed like the answer to their prayers. The facility had hosted Beatles sessions, David Bowie recordings, some of the most legendary music of the era. The Sheffield brothers, Norman and Barry, who ran Trident, made Queen an offer that looked perfect on paper. Unlimited studio access, professional production support, management guidance, everything a struggling band needed to break through. In 1972, Queen signed 3 separate contracts with Trident, recording, publishing, and management all under one roof. The deal gave them access to studio facilities that even established bands couldn't easily book. But the price for that access was buried in small print, in clauses written by lawyers who understood exactly what they were creating. What Queen didn't fully understand when they signed was that they'd essentially sold their future to access their present. By 1974, Queen's first 3 albums, Queen, Queen II, and Sheer Heart Attack, had all been produced under Trident's umbrella. Killer Queen had climbed to number 2 on UK charts. Concert halls were selling out. Music press was writing about them. The band everyone had dismissed as too weird, too theatrical, too much was proving everyone wrong. Success had arrived, but the money hadn't. Brian May was living in a tiny one-room flat, struggling to pay basic bills. John Deacon had just gotten married and asked management for help with a modest down payment on a house. The request was denied. Roger Taylor would later describe having to get permission to buy new drumsticks and being told no. Freddie Mercury was heating his apartment with a portable heater he could barely afford to run. Meanwhile, their management was driving expensive cars, living lavish lifestyles, hosting extravagant parties. Roger would later say that seeing those long limousines triggered something in all of them. "We thought, wait a minute, something's very wrong here." The technical reality was this. The contract paid Queen a small weekly wage while all revenue went toward recouping Trident's investment in the band. By late 1973, that investment was estimated at around $60,000. The more successful Queen became, the deeper in debt they appeared to be. Norman Sheffield would later defend himself in a book he published. He'd taken enormous financial risks on an unknown band, he argued. The contracts were standard for the time. The demands Queen made, Freddie wanting a grand piano for touring, for instance, weren't financially viable before revenues started flowing. From Trident's perspective, this was just business, industry standard, nothing personal. But for Queen, it wasn't business. It was betrayal. 4 men had sacrificed everything to make music, had lived in poverty while their songs climbed charts, had watched their success enrich everyone except themselves. And the people who'd promised to support them were the ones getting wealthy from their work. That's not a contract dispute. That's theft dressed in legal language. By 1975, Queen couldn't take it anymore. The legal battle to escape Trident was long, expensive, and brutal. When they finally broke free, the price was devastating. $100,000 in immediate compensation plus a percentage of royalties from their next 6 albums. Read that again. A band that had worked for years, produced hit songs, filled concert halls. They had to pay $100,000 and sacrifice future earnings just to escape the contract they'd signed. That was the cost of freedom. They were finally working on their 4th album. It would be called A Night at the Opera, and Freddie Mercury had a score to settle. All the rage he'd suppressed while living in freezing apartments and watching his managers drive luxury cars. All the humiliation of begging for money to buy equipment while his songs made others wealthy. All the betrayal of trusting people who'd exploited that trust. All of it had been building for 3 years. Freddie turned emotions into music the way other people breathe. The stage was his confession booth, his therapy session, his battlefield. And now he had something to confess, something to work through, someone to fight. The outlet was obvious, a song, but not just any song. This would be the album's opening track, not a gentle introduction, a declaration of war. Freddie later admitted openly, he wanted the lyrics as vicious as he could make them. He wasn't interested in restraint or subtle criticism or coded language. This was going to be pure, unfiltered hatred committed to melody. When he first showed the lyrics to his bandmates, the room went absolutely quiet. This wasn't like anything Queen had written before. It was raw, brutal, almost frightening in its intensity. But they all reached the same conclusion. Freddie should write exactly what he wanted to write. Brian May sensed this was necessary catharsis and actively encouraged Freddie to hold nothing back. The music matched the fury perfectly. It opens with elegant, almost classical piano, Queen's signature move of seducing you with beauty before hitting you with power. Then it explodes into aggressive guitar riffs that sound like controlled violence. And when the lyrics start, they're a verbal assault on someone never named but absolutely unmistakable. The target was clearly Norman Sheffield. Freddie called him a parasite, a bloodsucker, a sewer rat, greedy, dishonorable, trapped in the rotting swamp of his own arrogance. Every line found a new way to eviscerate. You suck my blood like a leech, you break the law, and you preach. This wasn't metaphor or artistic interpretation. This was direct accusation set to music. But some lyrics went even darker, lines that essentially told the target to consider ending his own life. That's how deep Freddie's rage went. The music channeled all that fury into something magnificent, complex harmonies, aggressive guitars, Freddie's voice shifting from whisper to roar. This wasn't just Freddie's hate letter. It was signed by all 4 members, a collective decision. Freddie later said, "The album needed a strong opening. What better than first lyrics being, 'You suck my blood like a leech'?" When A Night at the Opera was released in November 1975, the opening track immediately caused waves. The full title was Death on Two Legs, dedicated to. Those 3 dots represented one of music history's most elegant passive-aggressive gestures. No name was ever written. But that blank space became a more effective accusation than any name could have been. It was an open secret. Everyone in the industry knew who was meant. But by not naming him, Freddie had essentially invited the target to identify himself. And Norman Sheffield walked straight into that trap. He was furious, filed a defamation lawsuit against the band and their label EMI. But this move backfired spectacularly. By claiming the song defamed him specifically, he was publicly announcing that he was the target. He was saying, "Yes, I'm the blood-sucking leech. I'm the sewer rat. I'm the person these lyrics describe, and I'm suing to prove it." You cannot claim defamation without admitting the statement was about you. Sheffield had just done Freddie's work for him. The legal process was complicated and expensive, eventually settled out of court, costing Queen more money. Sheffield also continued receiving royalty percentages from subsequent albums as part of the original escape deal. Freddie had already paid an enormous price for freedom. Now he was paying again. Lawyers advised Freddie to never publicly confirm who the song was about. Freddie followed this advice in his own particular way. He obeyed the letter while violating the spirit. In concert, he would introduce the song by dedicating it to someone. The words were censored from official recordings, but everyone in the audience heard them clearly. In formal settings, he wouldn't name names, but his smile, his posture, the edge in his voice said everything. A Night at the Opera became one of Queen's greatest albums, sold millions worldwide, rescued them from financial catastrophe, elevated them to genuine superstar status. The same album contained Bohemian Rhapsody, and it contained Death on Two Legs. These two songs, considered together, showed Queen's dual nature. Bohemian Rhapsody displayed their genius, their musicality, imagination, courage to push boundaries and ignore rules. Death on Two Legs revealed their humanity, four real people who'd been betrayed, exploited, enraged, and who channeled that fury into art's rawest, most honest form. Brian May later described how the emotions that had built up during the Trident years poured out after they escaped, fueling their most productive creative period. So in a way, the rage that produced that song also prepared Queen's ascent to the peak. A brief aside is necessary here. Some Queen fans have claimed that Flick of the Wrist from the previous album, Sheer Heart Attack, also targeted Sheffield. But Freddie specifically denied this. In an interview, he said, "I wrote that about the backstabbers and conmen we were meeting, done with a tongue-in-cheek approach. Our manager might want to think it's about him, but it isn't." This clarification shows how calculated Freddie was about Death on Two Legs. One song genuinely targeted someone, the other didn't, and Freddie knew the difference. Norman Sheffield died in 2014. Before his death, he published a book defending his actions during the Trident years, claiming innocence, explaining the value of resources he'd provided, the risks he'd taken. After Sheffield's death, Brian May posted a partially conciliatory statement, acknowledged the deep divisions that had existed, but also noted that time had left much of it behind. This was a complex position, not forgiveness, but not continued hostility either. That ambiguous middle ground where human relationships often end up. But the song remained, unchanged by passing time, by people dying, by doors opening toward reconciliation. Death on Two Legs is remembered as one of rock history's most vicious diss tracks. But its value doesn't come solely from its aggression. It comes from its honesty. In an industry where major musicians are often remembered as flawless, untouchable figures, this song reminds everyone that Queen were real people who could get angry, could be hurt, could have the courage to express that hurt publicly, admitting that even at the peak of success, even with millions of fans, you still carry an old wound waiting to be addressed. That's not a power move. That's a deeply human confession. Freddie Mercury filled those lyrics with poison, but that same poison became fuel for the enormous energy that carried Queen to freedom. It became their declaration, carved into history through music, that they refused to be victims. And today, nearly half a century later, when those opening piano notes play and then explode into aggressive guitar riffs, something can still be felt. A scream. Controlled, perfectly executed, but at its core, pure and unfiltered. This might be rock history's most elegant rage. The beautiful thing about Death on Two Legs is that it works on multiple levels. If you don't know the backstory, it's still a powerful, aggressive opening to a legendary album. The music alone, that contrast between elegant piano and savage guitars, Freddie's voice moving from controlled menace to unleashed fury, creates an emotional experience that needs no context. But if you do know the story, if you understand what Queen had endured, the song becomes something more. It's not just music, it's justice. It's four people who were exploited taking back their narrative and their power through the only weapon they had, their extraordinary talent. Think about the calculation involved. Freddie could have written a straightforward attack song, named Sheffield directly, vented his rage obviously. But that would have been legally actionable from the start, and personally unsatisfying. Instead, he wrote something elegant enough to avoid immediate legal consequences while making the target absolutely unmistakable to anyone who mattered. He created a trap, those three dots in Dedicated To, that required Sheffield to identify himself if he wanted to fight back. And Sheffield, furious and presumably not thinking clearly, walked right into it. By suing, he confirmed everything Freddie had implied. By demanding the world know the song was about him, he became the punchline to Freddie's joke. That's not just revenge, that's artistic revenge. That's revenge elevated to the level of performance art. Queen's lawyer must have privately loved it. They'd advised Freddie never to publicly name Sheffield, and he didn't need to. Sheffield named himself. The story also reveals something essential about Queen's character. They could have taken the safer route, accepted the exploitation, kept quiet, focused on building success within the system that was crushing them. Many bands did exactly that, stayed in bad contracts because fighting seemed too risky, too expensive, too likely to damage their careers. Queen chose differently. They fought. They paid an enormous price for freedom, and then they used their first album after escaping to publicly declare what had been done to them. That took courage, real courage, because they were gambling their newly won freedom on the assumption that fans would understand, that the honesty would matter more than the controversy, that the music would be good enough to overcome the drama. They were right. A Night at the Opera didn't just succeed despite opening with a vicious personal attack. It succeeded partly because of that attack, because it showed Queen as complete artists, capable of operatic beauty, Bohemian Rhapsody, capable of raw fury, Death on Two Legs, capable of everything in between. Audiences don't want perfect, untouchable icons. They want real people making real art about real experiences. Death on Two Legs was devastatingly real. The song also worked because it channeled universal emotions into specific accusations. Most people have felt exploited at some point, have worked hard while someone else took credit or profit, have trusted someone who betrayed that trust. Freddie's fury at Sheffield was specific, but the emotions were universal. When you hear, "You suck my blood like a leech," you might think of your own bloodsucker. When you hear, "You're a sewer rat decaying in a cesspool of pride," you might picture your own sewer rat. The song gave voice to anger millions of people carried but couldn't express. That's what great art does. Takes one person's specific experience and makes it resonant for everyone. Years later, a music journalist asked Brian May if he regretted Death on Two Legs, if the vindictiveness bothered him in retrospect. Brian's answer was revealing. No regrets. That song was necessary. We'd been carrying that anger for years. It was poisoning us. Writing it, recording it, releasing it. That was how we got free. Not just legally free from the contract, but emotionally free from what had been done to us. He paused, then added, and honestly, the song is fucking brilliant. Forget the backstory, forget the controversy. It's just a fantastically crafted piece of music. We're proud of it as art, not just as revenge. That's the final triumph of Death on Two Legs. It works as revenge, but it also works as music. Decades after Sheffield's death, decades after the legal battles ended, decades after the exploitation became historical fact instead of current crisis, the song still sounds incredible. The piano intro still seduces. The guitar riff still attacks. Freddie's voice still moves from threatening whisper to explosive rage with breathtaking control. The harmonies still showcase Queen's unique ability to make four voices sound like an orchestra. Strip away every bit of context, and you still have 3 minutes and 43 seconds of exceptional rock music. But add the context back, and you have something more. You have proof that great art can come from terrible experiences. That exploitation can fuel extraordinary creativity. That revenge, when executed with enough skill and intelligence, becomes indistinguishable from triumph. Norman Sheffield gave Queen unlimited studio access. He helped them develop their sound. He took financial risks on an unknown band. All of this is true. He also structured contracts that enriched himself while keeping the band in poverty. He controlled their earnings while they lived in unheated apartments. He profited from their success while denying them the resources to survive. This is also true. Both things can be true simultaneously. Life is complicated, people are complicated, business relationships are complicated, but Death on Two Legs isn't complicated. It's clarity. It's four musicians saying, "We were exploited. We know who did it. We're telling everyone. And we're doing it through the most vicious, brilliant, unforgiving piece of music we can create."